to continue yet another wonderful speaker, we have our IEM Distinguished Keynote Speaker for lunch, Mary Jo Kreitzer. So Mary Jo earned her doctoral degree in public health at the University of Minnesota, focused on health services research, policy, and administration, and her master's and bachelor's degrees are in nursing. She's the founder and the director of the Earl Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota, where she also serves as a tenured professor in the School of Nursing, and she's also a collaborator with the Bakken Medical Device Center and Hubert Lim. She served as the principal investigator or co-principal investigator of numerous clinical trials focusing on mindfulness meditation with persons with chronic disease, including studies focusing on solid organ transplant, cardiovascular disease, chronic insomnia, diabetes, and caregivers to people with Alzheimer's disease. Recent studies include the role of mindfulness in improving human brain-computer interface, the use of social technology to enhance healing and well-being, and mindful movement for physical activity and well-being in older adults. From 2004 to 2007, Dr. Kreitzer served as the vice chair of the Consortium for Academic Health Centers for Integrative Medicine. In 2009, she testified at a U.S. Senate hearing titled Integrative Health Pathway to Health Reform, as well as the Institute for Medicine Summit titled Integrative Medicine and Health of the Public. She was named in 2020 as one of the 100 most influential healthcare leaders in Minnesota by Minnesota Physician. Dr. Kreitzer regularly presents to practitioners and public audiences, as well as at academic and healthcare conferences. She's authored over 150 publications and is co-editor of the text Integrative Nursing, published in 2014 by Oxford University Press. The third edition of Integrative Nursing was published in 2025. She's a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, a distinguished policy fellow in the National Academies of Practice, and a fellow ad undum of the Faculty of Nursing and Midwifery at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. Please help me to welcome Mary Jo Kreitzer to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, John, for that kind introduction, and it's truly an honor for me to be with all of you today. When I was asked to give this distinguished lecture to such a distinguished audience, I was invited to speak about the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. But I actually wanted to, and I'll talk a little bit about the Bakken Center for sure, but I really wanted to put it in a much wider frame. I wanted to talk about the legacy of Earl Bakken, from inspiration to innovation, and talk about some of the qualities of Earl, I think, that continue to impact us today. And then I'll talk about both the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing and some about the Bakken Medical Device Center and associated labs, and some exciting work that we're doing together. And then I'll end by talking about, I think, some challenges and opportunities for the field. But before launching into my talk, I want to say that I so recognize with the people that are here gathered that I will be only talking about Earl's legacy. That's a slice, maybe even just a sliver of his legacy, because truly the impact, those of you in academia, in industry, Medical Alley, know the impact of Earl every day as he has affected the work that you do. At the panel this morning on MedTech, somebody said that if Earl Bakken had not been born in Minnesota and started Medtronic in Minnesota, we may not all be here today. We might be someplace else. So I'll talk about the legacy of Earl Bakken, innovation emerging from our centers, and opportunities in the field. So those of you who knew Earl Bakken know that in so many ways he defies labels. So he was a father, he was a partner, he was a friend, but he also was a biomedical engineer, an inventor, an innovator, an entrepreneur, a leader, a humanist, and a philanthropist. And above all, he was a visionary. And this was a quote that Earl often used. He would say, "I believe in dreams and visions. Dreams and visions have a way, I've learned, of predicting and preceding reality." And Earl really was a visionary, and he was a dreamer. If you know a little bit about Earl's life, at the age of 8, he attended the movie Frankenstein in the theater in Columbia Heights here in the Twin Cities. And he was mesmerized by that film. And in that film, if you know the story, the mad scientist or the doctor used electricity on inanimate body parts to create the monster Frankenstein. And Earl was fascinated by the power of electricity. In fact, from a very young age, he was obsessed with building things, trains from erector sets, a radio from a crystal set, and a 5-foot robot that blinked its eyes, brandished a knife, and talked and puffed on hand-rolled cigarettes. I so wish I had a picture of that robot. He also made a homemade taser-like device to keep bullies away. And Earl used to say to me, I was a nerd growing up, and I really was bullied, and that was part of the motivation for creating this taser. But it was at the time that he was going through confirmation that a pastor, his minister, said to him, use science to benefit humankind, not for destructive purposes. And Earl describes that was actually a real turning point in his life. So at the age of 25, as many of you know, he formed a company with his brother-in-law, Palmer Hermunsley, to service medical electronic equipment, thus the name. The company was called Medtronic. And Earl was only 33 when the famous heart surgeon C. Walter Lillehei was operating on babies born here at the University of Minnesota Hospital with a heart defect, the blue babies, and was concerned about how to ensure a consistent power supply during electricity blackouts. And he asked if Medtronic could help solve the problem. And 1 month later, Medtronic, Earl, delivered the first wearable battery-operated transistorized cardiac pacemaker. And as Earl often would like to say, there wasn't the FDA regulations at that point in time. And the rest is history. So the company Medtronic, as we know it today, has become a global healthcare technology company that develops and manufactures medical devices and healthcare solutions for a wide variety of conditions, heart disease, diabetes, neurological disorders, and with over 95,000 employees in 150 countries. And actually, Earl used to track how many employees and how many countries. And so if you would visit with him, he loved to talk about not only the impact, but the scope of Medtronic. But I think one thing that's really interesting to think about are the qualities of Earl's mind that made him so successful in what he did. Earl had an incredible curiosity. And he used to read, it was reported, 187 journals a month. He received that many, and he would read that many. And I know I'm not alone. There's probably others in this room that when you would go and visit him, there would be a stack of journals on his table with yellow sticky notes, specifically highlighting things he wanted to talk to you about. And I see some of you smiling. You recall this. And invariably, during the meeting with Earl, he would be going through various things. He would call somebody in to his office to make a copy for you. He had an incredibly broad lens. I think that's one of the things that I really learned from Earl is obviously know my field, but study widely beyond my field because there's so much to learn at the edges. Think outside the box, be provocative, and Earl really believed that he could do anything. And so I think that is the mindset that Earl had. Earl was also an incredible leader, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to distill from Earl's leadership. He had incredible clarity around the mission of Medtronic. And new employees of Medtronic would be invited to go through a mission and medallion ceremony, and where Earl would actually hand them a medallion. On one side it would say, towards a full life, and on the other side it would say, contribute to human welfare by the application of biomedical engineering to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And so he was somebody who really believed that regardless of what you were doing within the company, it was so important that you recognized that you were contributing to the mission. And he did something else that I think now you can kind of look back and say, fascinating. He really had an instinct about the importance of listening to patients' stories. And many of you know about the Medtronic holiday party where he would invite patients to come in and tell their story. This is what we call today patient experience, right? And so Earl was doing it back then because he really felt like people that are, maybe in a manufacturing plant or working administratively or working in human resources, everybody needed to know the impact that their products were having on people. He really believed it was very, very critical to be near the end user. And he had a very interesting philosophy that I'm sure many of you have heard about, ready, fire, aim. And his philosophy was, as he described it, to inspire Medtronic engineers and physicians to follow their instincts, trust serendipity, and find creative ways to solve medical problems. So be ready, prepare, and then do something, take action, and then be iterative and refine your approach. Well, isn't that what we call today design thinking? Very early version of design thinking. He also had a very interesting leadership philosophy, and there's a publication called Essays of Leadership, and he talks about various principles of leadership that he believed were really important. And there was one principle of leadership that I found really intriguing when he described it, and the statement was, break free of policy binds. And as Earl tells the story, he was driving through Texas with a salesperson who was talking about the frustration about working with a physician who was unhappy about not being able to get a longer wire, a longer lead on a Medtronic device. And the salesperson said, it just can't be done. And Earl said, on Monday, I'll call the office. Of course, he should be able to get a longer lead. Monday came, Earl called the office, and they said, no, it's against policy to change that device. And so a short time after that, Medtronic leadership was meeting for a leadership retreat in a lodge up in northern Wisconsin. And on the second night of the meeting was a fireside chat with Earl. And Earl came in after everybody was seated around a roaring fire, dragging 2 policy and procedure books of Medtronic with a plastic chain. And when he reached that roaring fire, he threw the books in. And the president at the time said, don't believe Earl. But Earl's point, that actually is a really interesting point, is let's not let policy and procedure get in the way of doing the right thing. And again, being very, very close to the customers. What many of you might not know is that Earl also had a real interest in the whole field that we call now of integrative medicine. Back in the 60s, it was called more alternative medicine. And Earl was fascinated by the mind-body connection. And he was a deep student and believer of therapies such as acupuncture, Reiki, and massage, all of which he received on a regular basis. He was also fascinated by the impact of the placebo, and he thought it was ridiculous that people would diminish the role of the placebo. It was Earl's perspective that people should be harnessing the power of the placebo. And there was a time that Earl called me, and Earl would periodically call me. I'd be in the middle of a meeting, and my phone, I'd look, and oh, it's Earl Bakken. And I would step out of the meeting, and on this one occasion, he called because he wanted to talk to me about a book called You Are the Placebo. Such an important book that you need to read this book, and we'll talk about it next week. And I said, absolutely, I'll download it. 2 days later, when arrived, Earl wasn't taking any chances. So Earl had this interest, and it was in 1995, so it was I started the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing 30 years ago. And it was in our first year that I got a call from Medtronic saying Earl Bakken wanted to come and visit me, and I was a little bit alarmed and astonished and perplexed. Like, I knew Earl from the medical device world and Medtronic. Why in the world did he want to come and see me? And the reason that he wanted to come was clear. He had this deep interest in spirituality, healing, integrative therapies. And so I prepared for that meeting, and I knew everything that people were doing across the country. There were a handful of universities that were establishing programs. I was prepared to describe what we were doing and what I thought we could be doing in the future. But that's not at all what Earl wanted to talk about. So when I met with Earl, what he wanted to talk about was who I was and the quality of my thinking. And that was really what Earl wanted to sort of explore, because I think he wanted to get a sense of what was the potential and what were the possibilities. So Earl was really interested in the history of healing, old instruments. That's the origin of the Bakken Museum that has lots of old instruments. He was interested in culturally based healing traditions and the power of combining the best of conventional and integrative care. And that really became manifested in a concept that he called blended medicine. And at the pinnacle of this in North Hawaii, where he had retired, he really infused in North Hawaii Community Hospital both integrative therapies and culturally based healing practices. He wanted an environment that was high-tech, high-touch, and that was truly an environment of healing. So I know the Dean of the College of Design is here, and Earl really believed in evidence-based design and the power of creating healing environments, and that environments could, in fact, contribute to healing. So that's a little bit about, I think, how Earl, influenced me early on. So the center, as I mentioned, was established in 1995. We're a hub of scientific discovery, scholarly endeavors in whole person health and well-being. And you'll hear me talk about whole person health throughout the rest of my talk. We have over 80 faculty members that have appointments in the center, representing diverse disciplines and healing traditions. So some of our faculty are based in collegiate units and have appointments in the center, and other faculty we hire directly. We've really been, for 30 years, a pioneer in forging new and bold paths in educating students, conducting research, and empowering people at every age and stage of life to live fully and to take charge of their health and well-being. So that's been a real deep value for us. How do we help people acquire knowledge and skills to make better decisions? So this whole concept of whole health is both old and very new. So when you think of whole health, it really is encompassing the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. In current definitions, it's emphasizing physical, behavioral, spiritual, and socioeconomic well-being as defined by individuals, families, and communities. Whole health requires an interprofessional, team-based approach and focuses very much on empowering people to take charge of their health and well-being. So when I said it's a very old concept and new, it's new because, at the level of NIH, at CDC, at Veterans Administration, there's a lot of recognition of the importance of whole health, and that whole health can really contribute to different health outcomes. So whole health is very related to another concept, being the concept of well-being, and a lot of the center's work really talks about infusing well-being into our education, our research, and our outreach programming. And again, when we began talking about well-being, now it's probably been 12 or 14 years ago, a lot of people would think, well, that's just a synonym for health. But as I'll introduce you to the center's well-being model, you can see that health is actually a dimension of well-being, but there are other dimensions as well. But what's interesting to me is that now the WHO has a Geneva Charter for well-being. The NIH has held investigator meetings on well-being. The National Academy of Engineering, Science, and Medicine has put out monographs on well-being. So when we think of important metrics as outcomes of what we do, I really encourage us to think of whole health as a strategy for really achieving well-being. And when we talk about well-being, we talk about health, but we also talk about purpose, relationships, community, the importance of feeling safe and secure, and the role of the environment. And all of those become determinants of well-being. So a few more things about the center. We have academic programs. We were the first university in the country to offer a master's degree in health coaching. We have a graduate minor and certificate in integrative therapies and healing practices. We have over 70 undergraduate and graduate level courses. And interesting, we draw students from every collegiate unit across campus. When the center started, I assumed we would draw from medicine, nursing, public health, vet med, academic health center related programs. We draw students from law, contemplative law, design, healing environments, business. So really any collegiate unit that wants to integrate a more whole person worldview. We have many academic areas of focus. I'm going to not read through these, but you can just sort of see the range of courses that we teach. And these also are represented in areas where we do research. And then finally, we also have a lot of community engagement and business development work. We have something called a Mindful Monday, and it's a hour long at noon that people can link via Zoom. We used to have it in the meditation space in the Mayo Building, and maybe 30 or 40 people would show up for Mindful Mondays. During COVID, we made it virtual, and we would get up to 500 or 1,000 people, and we have continued to offer it in that format. We do a lot around student mental health, and a lot of our outreach programming is disseminated not only throughout the state, but throughout the world. And we're really proud of the fact that we've reached people in 86 out of 87 counties in Minnesota. And the last thing I'll say about our community engagement areas, we have a website called Taking Charge of Your Health and Wellbeing, and we get about 3 million unique visitors annually from around the world on that website. So I want to talk a little bit more about our research team, and talking about our research team and the kind of research we do, that will then bridge to talking about work that we're doing in collaboration with Hubert Lim and his team. So our integrative health and well-being research team is led by Dr. Ronnie Evans, and Dr. Evans is here today along with Brent Leninger. Their primary focus is chronic pain, and given the opioid crisis, looking for non-pharmacologic solutions for chronic pain is really important. The broad goals of the program are to empower people to lead active and meaningful lives, reduce health disparities, diminish the burden of chronic disease, and ensure that our research is meaningful to those we serve. And so our research, I think one of our strong capabilities is that we have a lot of community engaged research, and we start engaging the community as we're designing the study. So not just when we have findings and we report back to the community, this is what we found. We really engage the community in co-design. And I think that has been real key to our success in retaining people within our studies. So the team has received over $25 million in NIH funding over the past 10 years, and it's been recognized by the NIH for our work with underserved populations. One of our studies that I'll talk a little bit more about, the Partners for Pain study, 75% of the participants were from NIH-defined racial and ethnic minority groups. And again, the success of recruitment like that is very much due to our strong community partnerships. So that team takes a whole person perspective, looking at the whole person, social, psychological, biophysical, and their goal, and this is very similar to some goals that Hubert has, are to optimize interventions so they're affordable, practical, effective, cost-effective, acceptable, safe, and equitable. And the kind of interventions this group looks at include manual therapies, exercise, mindfulness, cognitive behavioral strategies, and other self-management approaches. And then you can see at the bottom of the slide the target outcomes, looking at pain severity, disability, quality of life, health and well-being behaviors. And their research portfolio, this slide gives you, and these are primarily NIH trials, give you a sense of the patient population and the focus of their research. So the PAC-BACK trial I'll talk about is how to prevent acute back pain from becoming chronic. The RAMP trial is with veterans and focuses on chronic pain. The SUPPORT trial, it focuses on back-related leg pain. And so that gives you sort of a sense of what that team does. So I'll just mention two studies, and these studies look at conventional care plus integrative. And so I mention that because when I start talking about Hubert and that work, that adds the technology piece that I think is really exciting. So the PAC-BACK study, 1,000 participants, is actually one of the largest back pain trials funded by the NIH. And there are 4 different groups, and the 4 different groups are a spinal manipulation group, a supported self-management group, a combined group, and then conventional medical care. And so in this particular study, we don't have published results yet, but I think you'll find impressive the follow-up rates and the treatment adherence. If you look at the bottom, all arms, 96%, 93, 93, and overall adherence, again, 96, 89, 84, 81. So we really believe the whole health approach, is effective, as is our community engagement strategy. Another study is the LAMP study. The PI on this is Diana Burgess from the VA. It's a study of 811 veterans with chronic pain for over 6 months. They had the option of receiving usual care, group mindfulness, or self-paced mindfulness. And this was then published in JAMA Internal Medicine, and you can look at the findings. Pain-related function over time was significantly lower for participants in both MPI groups compared to usual care. So I want to pivot now to talk about Dr. Hubert Lim and Molly Sturgis and the work that they're doing in the test lab as well as the Bakken Medical Device Center. So Hubert, very well known to this group, is a professor in the departments of biomedical engineering and otolaryngology, and he's the director of the Medical Device Center and the test lab. Molly Sturgis is a senior investigator in the test lab, and she is a faculty and program lead within the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And that's huge that Hubert and I share a position, and that has really helped us create a lot of connection and synergy. And together, Molly and Hubert have created the Whole Health Research Initiative in the test lab. And what they're doing under this initiative is applying whole health to biomedical research on neurotechnologies. And their focus is on being person-centric, accessible, at-home healthcare solutions. That's what their goal is. A couple of additional staff, Lei Feng and Grace Conscious, are also members of that team. And I'm going to talk about two projects that Hubert and Molly have been involved in. One focused on tinnitus and the other focused on back pain. So these projects combine integrative health modalities, music, health coaching, deep breathing, and non-invasive at-home neuromodulation in a way that amplifies the therapeutic outcomes beyond the individual components. And so for chronic tinnitus, it's looking at bimodal neuromodulation, so electrical stimulation on the tongue using the linear device, and auditory mirror therapy, so listening sound through headphones. And then there's additional arm of the study that includes the use of deep breathing. And so exciting, combining neuromodulation with an integrative approach and technology. And the goal of this study is to induce long-lasting neuroplasticity and alter the perception of tinnitus. And it's believed that the deep breathing may reduce stress and enhance long-term plasticity and actually increase the body's receptivity to external stimulation. So it might make the body more receptive to the neuromodulation. The chronic back pain study is also multimodal, looking at electrical and auditory stim with a TENS unit, similar auditory stim. And the integrative therapies they're bringing into this study include approaches such as deep breathing, health coaching, and journaling. So when you put together multimodal approaches like this, we really believe it enhances neuroplasticity in sensory, cognitive, and affective areas of the brain by targeting additional regions of the brain. And it reinforces analgesic effects. And like we have found with the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing research studies, we believe that this whole health approach will also increase compliance with protocol and treatment plans. And so I've described a whole body of research in a few slides. I think in addition to what I've described in terms of the kind of therapies, the whole health approach, I think modeled by Hubert and Molly, is really looking at how do you bring compassionate care into the research environment. And so this is actually a really bold culture change. And as you can imagine, when doing research like this, when bringing teams together that might be quite disparate, there are a lot of challenges. And, you know, Molly and Hubert and I identified about 6 challenges, and I've reduced this to, I think, 2. One challenge is it can be very hard to integrate different worldviews. Biomedical research often reduces a health intervention to a single mechanism, where integrative therapies often emphasize whole person care and systems biology. So that it poses lots of challenges in terms of how to design studies. When you do cross-disciplinary research like this, you're introducing different cultures, methods, measurements, vocabularies, and priorities. And it takes a lot of time. It takes patience, and of course it also takes space and funding to do this kind of research. So those are a couple of challenges. So some things that are on the horizon for medtech and integrative health I think are really exciting. One is that it's going to be really important to identify the subcomponents of integrative therapies and device interventions that drive specific health outcomes. And so that is an obvious need and priority. And it's going to also be really important to look at how do we combine the different subcomponents to assess for synergistic or additional effects. So in the study I described to you, if you add deep breathing and that reduces stress, how does that affect receptivity? Together, the Bakken, the Medical Device Center, Spirituality and Healing, we're really interested in looking at new at-home technologies that can capture quality of life and healthy living, to look at creative types of apps and virtual support that can achieve comparable benefit to in-person integrative therapies. And that will really enable both scalability and compliance. And we're also really interested in novel sensors that go beyond heart rate and movement to capture emotional state, inflammation levels, immune function, eating habits, sleep quality, et cetera. And so there's a lot of work on the horizon. And so you might be wondering, is any of this fundable? NIH, through the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, has actually been talking about whole health research, whole person research for a number of years now. And this monograph was put out on methodological approaches for whole person research. And they have also created a whole person health index and a self-report measure for capturing essential components of health. So if this is an area of interest, there are quite a few resources on the NCCIH website. The final area that I want to talk about that I think is incredibly exciting, and this personally has become a real passion for me, is the whole area of the neuroarts. And I'm curious that, if any of you have even ever heard of neuroarts before. It's a new field that explores the impact of art and aesthetic experiences on the body, brain, and behavior. And this monograph, the NeuroArts Blueprint, comes out of work at Johns Hopkins that Johns Hopkins has been doing for a number of years with the Aspen Institute. And we know through research that the arts, there's a long tradition of the arts and the belief that the arts can be healing that was more intuitive and culturally based knowledge. But what's been exciting is over the last 10 years, there's been more empirical research emerging that demonstrates that the arts can really improve physical and mental health, amplify our ability to prevent, manage, or recover from disease challenges, enhance brain development in children, and foster well-being through multiple biological systems. And the NIH has specifically had a sound initiative, and this was funded. Francis Collins was very interested in this and collaborated with Renee Fleming, who at the time was with the Kennedy Center for the Arts. And so it was a collaboration between NIH and the Kennedy Center, the Sound Initiative, where they funded for about 5 or 6 years research. And last year they held a multiple-day conference, also available on Zoom, where they were reporting the findings of this research. The other book, then Renee Fleming recently published the book Music in the Mind, Harnessing the Arts for Health and Wellness, and then her colleague, Susan Magsamen at Johns Hopkins, published this book, Your Brain on Art. Both of these people we recently have hosted as speakers, and their talks are on the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing website. So if you're interested in this, you could check that out. I think it provides an incredible opportunity for collaboration between neuroscience, engineering, health, and medicine. So Hubert and I, along with our colleague Molly, decided about a year ago, let's find out at the University of Minnesota who might be interested in the neuroarts. And so we put out a call, essentially a survey, and said, Are any of you out there interested in this? And if you are, what's your field? What work do you have in progress? What work would you like to be doing? And we actually, within a couple of weeks, had over 90 members. And so we are very, very early stages where we are starting to map the landscape, finding out who's doing what. We're doing lightning talks, very short talks, but invite people to come and present their work. We really believe there's incredible collaboration with community artists, and there's actually a lot of pent-up demand that even when community artists have heard we're interested in doing this work, have said, can we become part of the NeuroArts Network? And we quite honestly are trying to figure out first who at the U of M would like to step forward and be a collaborator and lead the research effort. So this is an area where we really believe philanthropic support is very welcome. If you'd stop at a table, we actually have a whole flyer on the arts and well-being and the NeuroArts and the NeuroArts Network. So if you're interested in that, please stop by and pick up one of those. So I started my talk by talking about Earl's legacy and view of the world and the fact that he was curious, had a broad lens, thought outside the box, was provocative in his philosophy of ready, fire, aim. But there was another dimension of Earl that I want to close with. Earl talked a lot about the importance of softer things in life, the importance of family. And one of his leadership principles, in fact, was family first. But in the final years of Earl's life, he often talked about what are those things that matter most in life. And what he would talk about was love, grace, tenderness of life, deep connections with people, and beauty. And this is the place in his home in Hawaii where he used to love to be wheeled to, that he called this his sanctuary. And it was just sort of a beautiful place where he would love to go and meditate. So the final slide, reflects Earl's deep desire that people give back. And probably about 5-7 years before he died, those of you at Medtronic would probably know the year, he actually started a whole initiative on giving back. And what he wanted to do was to have every, surgeon that put in a Medtronic device then ask patients, what are you going to do to make the world a kinder, more peaceful, and loving place? Because essentially he believed if you had a device put in, you were given another life, what were you going to do with that life? So I thought that was a beautiful note to end on. Earl really believed that we all need to find ways to live on, give on, and dream on. Thank you very much. So do we have time for any questions? We have time. Okay. And so if there are questions, there are roving mics. And I also have my colleagues, Hubert and Molly and Brent and Ronnie. So if you have questions specifically about their research, the roving mic is going to go to them. So I see a question back there.
I really did not expect to stand up and do this today. That was beautiful and inspiring. As one of the people who benefited from meetings with Earl and a vivid interrogation at his home, I wanted to double click on a couple of things because I think we all have opportunities every day. Earl was a teacher and a student until the end of his life. We have people like Paul and Art that are coming back every year to teach us. Take advantage of that and periodically say thank you. Earl is a myth, but we're surrounded by people who are with us today. Earl would study and interrogate and still wanted to drive advances. He told me, "You're way behind, please go faster." But he wanted to understand what the barriers. He would ask very challenging questions. I studied debate. I would turn it on him. As brilliant as he was, he had 3 responses that I was not prepared for. First, he would say, "I don't know." And that I take to this day. If you admit you don't know, the people around you, the IQ in this room is off the charts. If you admit you don't know, they'll teach you. And Earl asked me, "Will you teach me?" I had never imagined I'd be in that role. The other one was the tape flags. Before we had ChatGPT or search engines, he would say, I don't know, but I think I read about it, and shockingly turn to an exact page. So we can do it if we work hard enough. It's not magic, it's diligence. The other thing I would say is with respect to the integrated medicine or holistic medicine. At the time I spoke with him, I knew that there was a deeply, deeply miniaturized pacemaker, 1/10 the size of its predecessor, and was excited, and I knew he knew about it. But I asked him, are there areas of knowing his beliefs, integrated or holistic medicine, that you believe we could study with modern trials and maybe deliver with an implantable device, specifically acupuncture? And I still believe if you are curious and you have an open mind, that's a strength. Bad science is a weakness, but an open mind and curiosity are a strength. He was really intrigued by that. So I would say get the best of both worlds, have an open mind, and figure out what we can do with these things that have been handed down or practiced across the centuries, the eons, because there is a lot of wisdom there as well, even if we don't fully understand it yet. So thank you for sharing today. Thank you for letting me add to it.
Oh, and would you just tell us who you are and where you're from?
My name is Scott Defoe, and I had those experiences with Medtronic. I now am excited to work with Solventum locally with the 3M spin.
Great, thank you. Other questions or comments? So some of you must have other Earl stories that you want to tell. So Paul has one, okay.
I'll get to
John?
Paul in a second, but yeah, when I was, and since you prompted me, I'm going to tell a story, but then ask you a question. So as a junior professor, I was born and raised in California, so I came here, and I think your center was just getting off the ground, and I'm a professor in mechanical and eventually also biomedical engineering. And so it was the dead of winter, and Earl came in and started telling us about his sanctuary in Hawaii and how we should all open our minds to this. And I'm like, yeah, man, give me a plane ticket, dude. But, okay, so that's my Earl story. But my question is, so I run this engineering research center grant, which is an idea somewhat like what you're talking about that you do with Molly and Hubert and others, you know, convergent team science, really, right? You know, whole health, one person, whole health. And one of the things, so we do organ cryopreservation. Corkett gave a really nice talk yesterday, and we had a session today. And before they gave us the funding from the NSF, they were like, you really need to figure out how to bring ethics into this. And it hadn't really, like we sort of knew that, and we had somebody who was a transplant surgeon who became part of the team, Tim Pruitt, who's amazing. But they weren't convinced just by that, and we eventually brought in Susan Wolf, who many of you might know, who's a bioethicist and National Academy member, wonderful ethicist, and we figured out how to all begin to work together. And the thing is, like, I wasn't aware of any real, like, clear funding or ways to make ethics work together with engineering to do these things, to get out in front of some of the technologies we're working on, so that we could actually begin to work together and inform each other about how to make progress. And so I guess that's my sort of challenging question back to you, since you're doing it. Can you educate us on how we can work with you? Because we're trained to work in our disciplines, and we don't always know how to break out of that and take on these bigger challenges that actually allow us to grow, as you've just explained to us. So can you reflect on that a little bit?
Well, John, what an interesting, you know, question and invitation to reflect on that question. You know, we tend to do what we know. And so what do surgeons do? They do surgery. And so, you know, what do psychologists do? They kind of keep in their lane and they, you know, provide, you know, psychological treatment. And I think that at this time, I think the opening is to say that none of us, with the complexity of human beings, none of us alone, or rarely do we have the sole answer. And so I think that from a clinical perspective, I think that puts us such a responsibility on us to sort of say, if the principle is a do no harm, what is it that we should be doing first in terms of approaches? And so if people present with a chronic condition, Certainly there are technological interventions and there are pharmaceutical interventions, but sometimes there are non-pharmacologic interventions that make such sense to begin with. And you take like a phenomena like migraine headaches. So there's a lot of both technology and pharmaceuticals that can treat migraine headaches. But there actually is evidence that acupuncture has come up, can be quite effective as a first-line treatment. Doesn't work for everybody, doesn't help everybody. But I think thinking about moving from less intensive invasive to more as just a principle is one that I think could really inform our work clinically. And I think then we really can take that philosophy, into the lab as well. And I think that's what, you all are trying to do, in the various labs, associated with the University of Minnesota. Ethically, isn't that something that, in terms of both impact on the patient and use of resources, isn't it more ethical if we can use a less costly, less invasive solution? I mean, isn't that why even sometimes home-based therapies, if we can make those more readily available and sort of accessible, scalable, a lot less expensive than doing things in costly environments? So those are some things that come to my mind. So Paul.
Okay, I'll mention by Earl's stories. He visited the lab a number of times. When Earl visited the lab, he wanted to meet everybody in the lab. So we have volunteers, we have undergrads, we have graduate students, we have scientists. He wanted to meet each and every one, and he would sit them and ask them what everybody's role was and what they did. And then another comment, he was excited to see that there were so many women scientists and people working in the lab, and he was always pushing for more women in the medical device industry. So the women in here stay in the medical device industry.
So Paul, there's a question back over here. Paul, that is so true. And actually, he had a book full of articles on why women should be leaders and rule the world. And there was an occasion that I was invited into the Rathskeller of the Bakken Museum, along with Becky from Gustavus. Becky Bergman, who was in the Bakken Honor Society, and so was at the Medtronic for many years. And there were a couple other people and one of Earl's sons, and we were supposed to read this notebook before we went to the Rathskeller to engage in this debate. And essentially, it was a debate of why women were superior. That was Earl's thesis. Question back here.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for your talk. Markus Reiterer from currently Medtronic. And I also had the great pleasure to visit Earl about a year before he passed away in Hawaii. So every Medtronic employee had a standing invitation. You would call his admin, and then he would take an afternoon if you had to be in Hawaii. And I took my wife with me, and it was one of the best choices I ever made, because for the first time she understood what I was doing. And now to the question part. So we have to admit that we live in a hyper-capitalized world. The dollar turns the world, or whatever currency you want to think around. So if we really want to drive change through the connection of technology and spirituality, we need to figure out how we can implement these ideas and create products out of them, and I hope to do that also obviously in an ethical way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I always believe, as somebody who's very interested in healthcare policy and healthcare access, that evidence leads to reimbursement, which leads to access. And it's very hard to get things covered and done if there is no evidence. And so I really believe, and I love your question, looking at how do we combine devices and how do we combine spirituality with that, how do we design trials that we can actually measure that and have outcomes, because I think that will really drive change. So word of mouth, the centuries of experience, certainly is not enough. And I think now we're getting smarter about methods and measurements. So I think there are going to be ways, to measure things.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Mary Jo. I'm Molly, who was up there, that little picture. And I just wanted to, this is my third year at the conference. It's really amazing to be here, and the first time I've offered my voice into the space. And I just wanted to, John, I don't know where you went, but thank you for the question about ethics. And I just wanted to say, you know, in our world that Mary Jo and Hubert and I are sort of creating and involved in, it's very much experiential. We have a lot of challenges that can feel kind of small, and with it, to me, where I am, just sort of within this study or a certain study. But I just want to say, we know these are very complex times, and it really requires all of us, I think, to refer to our own direct experience. Many of us have an integrated direct experience within us, actually, of spirituality and technology. It's sometimes hard to bring that into the outer world. We're challenged to find new ways of evaluating. We're challenged to find the right questions. We're challenged to find truly collaborative environments where we can actually do something together and fall and get back up and grab each other's hands. But these are unprecedented times, and this relationship that Earl and Mary Jo and Hubert are speaking about, it's so critical at this time. And I think the other thing that we often leave out of this is we talk about sustainability, for example, with our practices, but we really have to work together to know, what does that truly mean? What are the metrics? How are we accountable? How do we deal with the financial imperatives within this? And so I think all of us together, I think about personal leadership, I think about new forms of leadership, but really this quote, who are we? Who do we want to be? And how are we enacting that? And so I just want to say, yeah, we're really on our path here with Hubert and Mary Jo, step by step. And so important to be in relationship with each other on the ground. And to all you young people coming up, we need you to refer to your experience and bring that forward in your unique ways too. It's the only way we'll find this. So the power of collaboration, the power of heart, the power of the long arc. It's not simple. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Jo. That was wonderful.